Okay, guys, very last slide. I'm sorry for the length of this, but just to look at some of the map, I think it's a good way to just kind of eyeball some of the changes related to World War I. So here we're looking at a map of 1915, and a couple of things that you can note is you have the Central Powers, so Germany, and just kind of note the size of Germany, where the border is with Germany on the Eastern Front, for example, where the border is with France, for example, on the Western Front. Of course, we have Austria-Hungary as one power, one empire. Of course, Bulgaria, a smaller country we haven't really talked about a lot, but also part of the Central Powers. The Ottoman Empire, which actually extends a good way down here as well. That is kind of a declining power at the start of the war in 1914, but certainly a big part of the war, not necessarily related to the Treaty of Versailles, but a different treaty that gets accomplished at the Paris Peace Conference. And then, of course, you can see here France and Great Britain and Italy, Sweden and Norway. Spain are neutral, but the rest of the countries surrounding Germany and Austria-Hungary, Serbia, Romania, Greece, Russia, etc., all of these countries are part of the Allied powers. And some of the things that happen as a result of the Treaty of Versailles in particular is a decrease in some of the land in Germany. So we noted that Alsace and Lorraine, these two areas, they're kind of right here, will ultimately go to France. So we can see France is actually a little bit bigger in the second map in 1919. Germany is a little bit smaller. This area here that's green is actually Allied occupied, so that's kind of that Rhineland area into some of the industrial capability of Germany. This is a demilitarized zone. Also, a section of it is going to be occupied. And we can also see that some of the land over here is also smaller than perhaps Germany was here. So you can kind of see this larger Germany in 1915. If you look at, okay, what's happened in 1919, well, we have an independent Poland that's been carved out here, also independent Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. All of these lands, and partially coming from Germany, so Germany's losing a little bit of territory. Interestingly, the German East Prussia, West Prussia is lost and it becomes part of Poland, but East Prussia is not, and it's actually still German. So this Polish territory kind of goes all the way north to enable the Poles to be able to access a port in the free city of Danzig. So there's actually this kind of German section right here, and Germany here, and then Poland kind of in between. So you get these really interesting borders. In Poland also, in some areas, is not necessarily only Polish speaking. There's Germans who are living in these new borders. There's also Russians who are living in these new borders, so kind of some interesting things. All of this land here that's kind of in this salmon color is new nations, but a lot of this land came from the land that Russia lost in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. So some things that, just kind of note before the Treaty of Versailles is that Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and Russia loses a lot of this land to Germany. So there's a time kind of in 1918 where Germany is much larger. When Germany loses the war, those countries become independent, right? So we see Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, etc. The country of Czechoslovakia also gets carved out here. You kind of have two ethnic groups that are kind of part of this new self-determined state. One, of course, is the Czechs, and the other group is going to be the Slovaks. So Czechoslovakia kind of representing both of those groups. We do not have this country today. We have the Czech Republic. So this is an area of the world where we've seen conflict, and ethnic conflict in particular. Yugoslavia actually gets established a little bit after the Treaty of Versailles, but the Treaty of Versailles sets up the recipe for Yugoslavia, which ethnically is going to be very diverse, having groups in it including Serbians, including Croatian people, so Croats. You also have Slovenes, and you also have Bosnians. So this becomes an interesting region because there's also different religions represented. So you might have Bosnian Muslims, you might also have individuals who are Christians kind of in this area. And so Yugoslavia is also a country that's no longer on our modern map, seeing a lot of ethnic violence, in particular in the area of Kosovo, and that happened in the 1990s. So that's kind of a little bit about the Treaty of Versailles, right? In the area of Finland, which was at one time Russia, right, becomes an independent country. Just one other thing to note that perhaps in addition to the Treaty of Versailles, which gives France some territory, takes away from Germany, gives some of these independent countries new national sovereignty, but often at the expense of Russian land. We also see some other new countries on the map. So if you kind of look at where the Ottoman Empire is, kind of all of this yellow here, you get some new countries. And Turkey becomes an independent country. And Turkey kind of represents the Turkish group that was once a part of the Ottoman Empire, and the leaders of the Ottoman Empire were Turkish, and generally it was a Muslim-led empire that had many diverse groups in it, but the Turks kind of identify in Turkey. And ultimately, Turkey becomes a very secular state. Ataturk, the leader, Mustafa Kemal, will kind of lead Turkey into a direction where it's not necessarily a theocratic state. It ends up being a very religiously secular state, even though the people in Turkey are predominantly Muslim. But there is a lot of Turkish nationalism in the time period when it first starts. And some of that Turkish nationalism actually has some very, very bad flavors to it. Ultimately, there is a genocide that occurs in the time period of World War I, the Armenian Genocide. And this largely occurs because of conflicts between kind of this rising Turkish nationalism and what is a crackdown against Armenian Christians in particular. And the Armenian Genocide leads to, some people and some historians argue, in the upwards of at least 1 million, perhaps more people forcibly asked to migrate, and then lots of people killed on the journey. There's also accusations of mass shootings and of mass drownings and lots of other ways that perhaps the military and the government was looking to crack down on the individuals as part of kind of this new ethnic state. So self-determination has some ugly sides to it, just as does nationalism. That particular genocide is debated and has been debated in terms of Turkish leadership. In any case, the part that you're going to have a hard time seeing over here, maybe I can somehow move this slide over. I'm not so sure. Sorry, that popped up. But right here is Syria. It's a little bit difficult to see. Next to Syria is Iraq, and then under Syria, to the kind of west of Syria, is small Lebanon. Also under that is Palestine and Transjordan. These areas that are all pink basically become colonial powers. And just to give you a sense of how this works, this relates to Prince Faisal, some of the other groups of people that seek independence. In addition to the Turkish group under the Ottoman Empire, there was also an Arabic group that was looking to kind of carve out an Arabic ethnic state, with the primary language being Arabic, not Turkish, and ultimately the religion largely Muslim. However, there was a lot of allowance for multiple religious groups, including Jews and including Christians, and the Arabic group, the Sharif Hussein, who was really looking to kind of create this large independent Arab state, essentially was perfectly okay with lots of different religious groups living in this, as long as the political system was kind of representative of Arab leadership. So other groups, even Zionist Jews who were looking for a homeland in the state of Palestine, were not necessarily a concern to the Arabic leadership, as long as people kind of fit into the political system that was going to be Arab-led. And there was actually a time that Prince Faisal set up in Syria, despite there being awareness of the Sykes-Picot Treaty, the secret treaty where Britain and France kind of carved out the Middle East and basically took parts of it for themselves, largely because of oil resources. So what develops in the Treaty of Versailles is this system known as the mandate system. It's kind of like a, maybe a new language for colonialism. Instead of, full all-out colonialism, it's kind of couched as oversight. And the idea would be like a country like France or Great Britain or even Japan, maybe even Belgium, would come in and kind of be the oversight group. The League of Nations might even pick the country that was going to kind of act in this capacity. And ultimately, in a mandate, the people might have independence in some time. But there was an understanding that the current time, there was really no ability for the group of people to have independence, that would be something impossible. So Syria actually does start its own government with Prince Faisal as the leader, and it actually creates a whole entire independent state, and France invades and basically says, you're not ready yet, and ultimately France kind of becomes part of the mandate power. So a lot of the people under the mandate system find themselves believing that not much has changed, in terms of its kind of colonialism, and they're arguably very, very right. It's just new language for colonialism, with some kind of couching and maybe some euphemisms that this is a temporary situation. And then lastly, this one last slide that's on the left. This is kind of looking at Syria, Iraq, Transjordan, Palestine in the time period of the 1930s. So much, much later, you can just see the advent of all of these oil refineries. That's not something that's developed. So in the area of Iraq, for example, where Great Britain had a mandate, a lot of this territory and these resources become under the control of a British petroleum company. So that's kind of the direction that this goes. And the French end up in Syria, the British largely in Iraq, and then also Transjordan. And Palestine is a League of Nations mandate for some time, and then Britain inherits that mandate. So there are different classes of mandates, but Palestine becomes a British mandate, and it's at this point where some of these past promises become very much in Britain's hands. So, look at kind of the modern issues revolving in Palestine. It's really important to look back to the promise that Britain made to Prince Faisal and the Arabic people about the way in which they could have some of this territory for an independent state. Also, the Balfour Declaration, a promise made to Zionist Jews that Palestine could be used for a homeland for Jews. And then there's also kind of additional investment that Britain has, and all of these agendas kind of get wrapped up into something that becomes really challenging when the mandate ends, who actually gets the land. So I hope that helps. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great night. I will post a 10-minute video clip that is about one topic, and that topic is related to the way that that's the signing of the treaty. This is just an image of kind of some of the mayhem in Germany, how people don't like the treaty. There's a lot of crowds. In the United States, there's actually a very, very big reaction at first, very positively, to the Treaty of Versailles. And even though Wilson doesn't get all the 14 points in there, when he ultimately brings the treaty home, he's not really expecting a huge, huge issue. However, there are Republicans now in Congress, and one in particular is going to be Wilson's, kind of the bane of his existence. Is Henry Cabot Lodge, despises Wilson with every bone in his body, and ultimately really is going to destroy any opportunity. We can argue that. He tries to make it hard to have Wilson get the Treaty of Versailles passed, and Wilson also neglects to compromise at all. So where Henry Cabot Lodge decides that he will compromise by offering some amendments to the Treaty of Versailles, some changes, Wilson refuses to accept those changes. So you could certainly blame Wilson himself. But there's a 10-minute video clip on Schoology that's very much about the debate. It's maybe 8 minutes or 10 minutes about the debate that Lodge and Wilson had. And also there becomes this very interesting kind of tragic story about Wilson and kind of what happens as he tries to get the American public to sign on to the Treaty of Versailles. He puts kind of everything he has into it, with great outcomes for his own personal health. So you might find that interesting. Okie doke, have a good night.